scripture this morning is Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, but where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
You guys are in for a treat today. Somebody said, well, it's about time. Fasting. Yeah. Fasting. Everybody say fasting.
Fasting.
Yep. It's a spiritual discipline. We've been talking about spiritual disciplines for a little while now. And next week is our last week. I won't ask you to give back a round of applause because it'll scare my son. But we'll do a golf clap, okay? Awesome. Yeah. Next week we're going to wrap up spiritual disciplines. We're going to combine two. And hopefully this has been a helpful thing for you. I know it's probably a little awkward, a little strange. Some of these disciplines really are a stretch. It seems like, man, I just can't apply these to my life today. Seems outdated, it's hard, and that's kind of the point, right, of a discipline. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a little odd. It's going to require a break in our daily routine. And so we come to fasting, which is one of the 12 spiritual disciplines. Disciplines are practices that open us up, you might remember this, practices that open us up to the presence of God, what He is doing in and around and through us. The reality of God in our world and in our own lives. And so today, if you haven't caught it already, we're going to talk about fasting. Quick audience poll here. How many people have ever heard a sermon on fasting? Okay, a few. Yeah, it's more than I thought. How many people have actually intentionally fasted? Okay, a couple more. How many was it diet related? How many people are claiming they fasted since breakfast? Yeah. Fasting is kind of one of those things that we kind of push to the side, right? We try not to think about too much. It's kind of been pushed out of our culture, especially in the religious context. Now, some diets they'll say, man, you need to fast. If you've ever watched any of the X-Men movies, I don't know if you have or not, but in that movie, there's a character named Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman, and he spends a lot of time with his shirt off. And I won't do that. But he does that. He's this huge, ripped, muscly guy, and the way that he gets in shape is he incorporates fast into his diet. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about something a little bit different. Fasting, in the biblical sense, is mentioned a lot, several times. In the Old Testament, several times in the New Testament. Fasting is mentioned a lot, but somehow it's made its way out of our culture, out of our churches, out of our sermons. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, if it's mentioned so much in Scripture as a positive, then maybe it's something that we need to revisit. Maybe it's something we need to take a closer look at. So that's part of the reason why we're going to talk about fasting today. Fasting, essentially, is the abstention or abstaining from food, not eating food, for a certain period of time so that one can grow closer in relationship to God. I mean, that seems pretty basic. Now, Sometimes you have different types of fast. Sometimes it's on a specific type of food, you fast from that. Sometimes you fast from all food. Sometimes you fast from food and water. Sometimes we have what are known as sort of supernatural, miraculous fasts, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Fasting. But first, what I want to do is talk first about appetites. Appetites. My good friend Andy Stanley, who probably forgot I existed, once said this. Who knows? Number one, he preached a sermon entitled Appetites to a huge group of college kids at a conference called Passion in 2011. And so this next 3 points is not original to me. But Andy Stanley, who's talking about our appetites, said that appetites are created by God, but distorted by sin. Created by God, but distorted by sin. We have all sorts of appetites. We have an appetite for food, that's an obvious one. We have an appetite for sex, that's an obvious one. We have an appetite for recognition, for acceptance, for fame, for power, for control. We have all sorts of appetites in our lives. And appetites were created by God, right? In the beginning, God created Adam and Eve, and He said, feel free to eat whatever you want, right? How many people remember this? Genesis, okay? You remember Genesis? Don't make me go back there. Genesis. Right? He created Adam and Eve, and He said, look at all these plants. You're welcome to eat any fruit in the garden that you want, except what's growing on the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, there in the middle of the garden. Right? So even our most basic desires, food, was created by God. Same with sex, same with power, same with recognition, and acceptance, and fame, and all those others. Okay? But they've been distorted by sin. When Adam and Eve first took that bite of forbidden fruit, right, and it created a fracture in all of the universe, everything became broken and started tearing apart and spiraling out of control. Even our appetites became distorted by sin. If you don't believe me, look at all the different ways. We'll just go back to food because it's one we all can relate to. All the different ways people can get in trouble by eating, right? They can go, their appetite for food can go both ways, right? You can either eat way too much and binge eat and overeat, or you have those who have trouble with food, a hate and a fear of food, and so they hardly eat. You have those who will eat but then throw up immediately. So even this very good thing, this appetite for food, has been distorted and twisted and manipulated by sin. Everybody still with me? Okay. And the same can be applied across to sex, I won't go into that, to fame, recognition, and power. You know how these things, these desires for success and for love and for pleasure, these things are good in and of themselves when they were created by God, have been twisted, manipulated. Appetites. The second thing Andy says about appetites is this: appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. Appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. You know this. I don't know if you know this, but you do. You go to the Dragon House, have yourself some General Tso's chicken, because you're hungry. You eat General Tso's chicken and rice. An hour later, you're digging through the fridge trying to find something to eat. That's just the way it works, right? Your appetite is never fully and finally satisfied. If you're a teenager, it's just never satisfied. Yeah. It never says enough, right? Even if you think it says enough, give it some time and it'll ask for more. The same goes with all these different appetites, okay? And last but not least, appetites whisper now and never later. Appetites whisper now and never later, right? If you're hungry, 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 and that's all you can think about until you eat, because that's the way appetites work. They don't say, I know you're hungry now, but you know what, we'll just wait till later. It'll be fine. That's not how appetites work. If you've ever dealt with an addiction, or you've ever been around somebody who has an addiction of some kind, you know that they have to have that fix, whatever it is. They have to have that fix now. all logical, rational, reasonable planning, that goes out the window because your appetites, a lot of the time, dictate and determine what you do. And so today, we're going to talk about fasting and trying to get our appetites under control, under God's control. Everybody still with me? Say amen. Amen. That was really just an excuse for me to get a drink. Because my thirst for water said now and not later. My son Parker is learning how to eat. He's been eating pretty well, as you know. But he's getting to a place where he thinks he knows when it's time to eat. We put him on a schedule, and we know, when the kids are growing up, it's important to have structure and schedule and organization and those types of things. But Parker, now that he's becoming more vocal, now that he's burning, calories because he's moving around and stuff, he thinks he knows when it's time to eat. And so we'll be like 15, 20 minutes before lunchtime, dinner time, and Parker will start doing this. Are you hungry? Okay. And he'll start making his way through the room, trying to find something that he can stick in his mouth and swallow, right? He needs something. That's part of the way that appetites work, right? We think, okay, I need to eat now. I could survive until later, okay, but we think, I have to satisfy this desire, this appetite, now. It's a practice in patience and discipline. And I'm sure Parker learned something too. Maybe not. So here's the question. We're going to get right down to it, right? So why fast? Why fast? We live in America. We've been blessed with all sorts of things. We have refrigerators and freezers and extra freezers and more freezers and pantries and cabinets full and full and full and overflowing, right? So this idea of fasting seems a little foreign. So why should we fast? The first reason, if you're taking notes, the first reason why we should fast is because it strengthens our dependence on God. It strengthens our dependence on God. And I'm going to talk about food in specifically, but we'll get to the other ways you can fast later. So just hang with me with the food illustration, okay? Let's say you decide to do a basic fast. You're going to go from, dinner tonight till dinner tomorrow night without eating. And you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. That's a very humbling experience. If you've ever fasted, you know. But if you haven't, it's a very humbling experience. Because you suddenly realize how dependent you are on those things. And so by stepping away from that and saying, God, me and you, right? Fill me. Provide for me. Get me through this day, this moment, these times. God, show me all the ways that I need you. It strengthens your dependence on God. As I mentioned a little bit ago, it also highlights your dependence on other things. Highlights your dependence on other things. My youth ministry professor in college, great guy, love him to death, good Christian man, one of my good friends, he has this problem with Diet Coke. Right? It's just Diet Coke. But he has to have a Diet Coke every morning. And so he gave it up for Lent one year. And realized just how hard it was, how attached he had become to Diet Coke. Fasting highlights the ways that we have anchored ourselves, tied ourselves to other things. Things that aren't necessarily bad. There's nothing wrong with Diet Coke. Right? Nothing wrong with food, nothing wrong with any of these things. But when it becomes your source of acceptance, your source of comfort, your source of nourishment, so to speak, whether it be physically or spiritually, emotionally, then it can become an issue. And the third and final reason why to fast, Jesus did it, and he supported it. And typically I try to listen to what he says. If Jesus thinks it's a good idea, maybe I should take a second look in my life. If Jesus did it in his life, and he's the Son of God. Surely little old me, the worst sinner of them all, should take a look at this practice, this spiritual discipline of fasting. If you have the Bible, Luke chapter 4 is where we're going to be. Luke 4, or it's also on the screen. So whichever you prefer to do. I feel like a generous guy today. So Luke chapter 4, starting with verse 1. So this passage will be familiar to you. It's right before Jesus' ministry. Right before Jesus started doing ministry, before he started going around teaching, before he started around with the disciples, before he did any healing or any miracles. This is what happened. Luke chapter 4. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan River and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. I love it when Scripture makes me laugh. Right? Jesus didn't eat for 40 days, and at the end of it, he was hungry. Thank you, Dr. Luke, for pointing that out for me. Not sure I would have got that. Yeah. Now, it is important to know, right? 40 days, okay? The human body can survive about 9 to 10 days without food. So what happens here is what is known as a supernatural type of fasting event, okay? I don't recommend that you fast for 40 days without eating, okay? It's not good for your health, but there's something supernatural that is happening here in this event that Jesus is able to survive for so long. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Suddenly Jesus' appetite is grumbling and is whispering now and not later. "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." He quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. And if you know the rest of the Deuteronomy passage, it says, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." And so Jesus, who is fasting, trying to get prepared for what God is going to do in, around, and through him in the coming years, he fasts and he prays, and his stomach is empty, but his spirit is full. Right? He is somehow nourished and cared for during this time. Man shall not live on bread alone. Jesus essentially says there's more to this life than simply fulfilling my desires. More to this life than just filling my belly. One of my favorite new shows on television is Shark Tank. Anybody like Shark Tank? Yeah, I saw some smiles. Some people like Shark Tank. I love Shark Tank. I love watching it. I love the personalities. I love paying attention to how people communicate and what makes a good presentation, what makes a bad communication presentation. And the whole premise of Shark Tank, if you don't know, is there are 5 wealthy investors in this room. They're known as the Sharks. And one at a time into the room comes a young, well, an up-and-coming entrepreneur, right? Small business owner. They need a little bit of help to push things to the next level. One of the things that's pointed out is a lot of times these businesses that are up and coming, that are trying to make their way through life, through business, one of the things that's often pointed out is that they need more than just money in order to succeed. They need strategic partners. They need somebody who can explain the business, somebody who can point them in the right direction. Same sort of thing out of the business world into our normal, everyday, spiritual lives. Man shall not live on bread alone. It's not just about fulfilling our desires, not just about saying yes to all of our appetites all the time, but sometimes, most of the time, we need to recognize that we need more than just that immediate fix. Everybody still with me? Okay. It's a little strange. That's all right. Fasting is a tool to evaluate and improve your faith. Fasting is a tool to evaluate and improve your faith. You remember last week I had a bunch of tools up here, right? And I showed you exactly how to use them. Right? If you need to cut something, you don't always grab a hammer. Right? If you need to screw something together, you don't just grab a circular saw. You use the tool that you need at the appropriate time to evaluate, to improve, to fix. Fasting is a tool to evaluate and improve your faith. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. Fasting, food is not bad. Food is not bad. How many people like food? Yeah. Food is not bad. So don't hear me say food is bad for you. Because it's not. Right? We were made to eat. We need food. But fasting is saying, God, I'm going to take these things that I need, these things that I know that I need, and for a moment, I'm going to set them aside and create space in my life, in my heart, in my time, to speak with you, to listen for you. Fasting should not be entered into without prayer. It's not something to just rush into. So what you won't hear me say at the end of the service is, all right, everybody go home and I want you to fast for the rest of the day. I'm not going to say that. Right? Because not all of us need it. Not all of us are there. Not all of us are at that point in our spiritual walk where we need to take a moment and fast. That's just not where we're at, all of us. So what you need to do as individuals is to go home and to pray and say, God, PT said this thing about fasting, and I was a little strange and a little bizarre. It had something to do with sharks. I don't know what it had. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. What do you want me to do with this? And listen. And maybe he will say, look, I want you to try a fast. I want you to skip one meal. And during that meal, we need to talk. I want you to just listen. Maybe he won't say anything. All right. It's an opportunity to grow. To show God that you need Him. When we were in the hospital last year, Rachel was giving birth to Parker. Parker was born. He was taken off. I was waiting in the hospital room. Rachel was wheeled in. This is what she looked like. And occasionally she'd moan and she'd kind of shake her weight, but she was out of it, right? She was heavily sedated because of the surgery and just tired. If you've ever had surgery, you know it just takes it out of you. And but she still had things that she had to do, right? Things that the nurses needed her to start working on and to start doing. And there were several things that she just physically couldn't do. And if you know my wife, she's very independent. She likes to be able to do things. She'll push a lawnmower and a snow blower and be up on a ladder and tearing stuff down and doing whatever you need. That's her personality. But in those couple days, she couldn't. And so she needed me. And there's something about, guys, you know, there's something about needing to be needed that fills us with a sense of purpose. It gives us a bit of pleasure to be needed. And in those couple days, it was good to be needed in that way. God, in the same way, wants you to show Him that you need Him. He already knows that you do. He just wants you to know Him. I told you that Jesus practiced fasting, but He also supported it. Roger read the passage a little bit earlier. And I'm going to read the Message paraphrase of that, which is in a little more common English. Matthew chapter 6. When you practice some appetite-denying discipline, fasting, to better concentrate on God, don't make a production out of it. It might turn you into a small-time celebrity, but it won't make you a saint. If you go into training inwardly, act normal outwardly. What does this mean? Well, okay. Let's say there's some big event, something coming up at church. We need help. Volunteer for this committee. We need help. Help out with this group, this event. Or PT says, you need to do this, you need to try this. This is a spiritual discipline, a practice that opens you up to the presence of God. And so you go home. You say, okay, I'm going to fast. And so you miss one meal. And you get on Facebook and you go, oh my goodness. I would kill for a Twinkie, right? And you get 74 likes. All the comments of people saying, oh, I'm sorry, what's going on, right? Or you decide to give up, I don't know, something else. How about you decide to go and give up coffee? Now we've hit home. You give up coffee for a day or two or a week, and you begin to get the jitters, right? And you show up to where your friends meet, and you get all together with your friends, and they're looking at you, and you're sitting at the table like this. They say, what's wrong? Pastor won't let me have coffee. Yeah. Sometimes we do stuff, and maybe we start with good intentions, but we want to try and draw as much attention to it as we can, so that people say, oh, you poor baby. What's wrong? That mean old pastor. Yeah. Jesus says, don't make a production out of it. This is between you and God. So in the Message paraphrase, he says, shampoo and comb your hair, brush your teeth, wash your face. God doesn't require attention-getting devices. He won't overlook what you're doing. He'll reward you well. Now, in some of your texts, the NIV, the King James, the RSV, whatever it is, right, it mentions putting oil on your head, washing your face, and taking a bath, whatever. Essentially, in that time, in that culture, when someone would put oil on themselves, they would do it after they had taken a bath. And it was a way of showing that they were clean. You'll recognize that whole thing when somebody was considered unclean or sinful, and they would go to the temple, the priest would say, you're now clean, you know, everything's good to go, and then you would anoint their heads with oil. It was kind of this show that I am healthy. And so, Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, which by the way went a lot longer than 40 minutes, Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, includes this passage about fasting. And he says, when you fast, notice he didn't necessarily say, if you fast, he said, when. When you fast, when you practice this discipline, he just assumed this would be a part of daily routine, daily practice. In fact, there was one time Jesus had a rich young guy come up to him, and he said, teacher, what must I do to be saved? Jesus said, keep all the commandments. And he said, I've done that ever since I was a youth. In fact, I fasted twice a week, every week. Think about that for a moment. Fasted twice a week, every week, and I've kept all the commandments since I was a boy. So Jesus just recognizes this is a part of what naturally goes on. People want to get closer to God. And so, because we are busy, because we've got a lot of things going on, we want to hand over a little bit of control to God and say, God, I'm dependent on you. And so I'm going to create some space, 10 minutes, 15. Hand over my dependence on things and stuff and food and all these other appetites and desires. And I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but I'm doing this so I can get closer to you, and I know that you're going to reward me helping you. Jesus said the people who make a big deal out of this, the Pharisees at that time, right, they would fast and they'd come in like the hunchback of Notre Dame. Right? And they'd be throwing stuff in the air, and they'd have like potato sacks on, and they just look awful. And they'd get people, oh, he is so holy. Look at him. And in fact, even after Jesus died, this is just fun facts for those of you who like this type of thing. After Jesus died and was raised again, and he went up to heaven, and the church got started, and then you had those early church fathers that I mentioned a couple weeks ago. You had some people, some really radical believers, radical extremists within the Christian faith, who took this idea of fasting and said, well, we must fast, and so they began to fast. And they decided, well, I have to deny myself of everything. And so some of them would stand up on the huge poles and make themselves as uncomfortable as possible. They'd stand on this pole for weeks at a time. Or they'd fast for long periods of time, and they'd say this body is terrible, and the flesh is awful, and it's all sinful, and it's all bad, and they would not eat, and they'd deny themselves water, and they'd beat themselves with whips, tear their bodies apart. It's not what this is about. It's not about a spotlight on us, saying, look at me, and look at how holy I am. It's about doing what you can in your own lives to create space for God to speak. I'm already done with that page. I do want to point out one thing. If you have your Bibles open to Matthew chapter 6, you'll notice that this passage on fasting is sandwiched, and you see what I did there? Sandwiched between prayer and giving. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, the disciples asked, Lord, teach us to pray. And Jesus said, okay, here's how you do it. Here's a template. He says, Our Father in heaven, and you know the rest. He teaches them how to pray. And then he goes right into, and when you fast, there's this relationship, this connection between prayer and fasting, growing closer to God. And then he wraps up the fasting stuff, and he goes right into, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. Prayer and your devotion, your dependence, your desires, fasting, right in the middle. I don't think it was a coincidence. No coincidence. Now, let's get honest, right? Some of you are thinking, well, that's good, Pastor. But, see, I have this condition, and if I don't eat, I will die. I understand. Right? Some of us have diabetes, some of us have other issues, heart conditions, whatever, and you have to eat, right? In order to keep moving on this planet. I'm not asking you to die. Not at all. But there are other things that you can fast from besides food. I was reading an article about this because I do a lot of reading on this stuff ahead of time, believe it or not. And I'm reading this article, and this lady gave up for one day critical judgment. She just felt like that was her thing. God, she prayed about it, gave up critical judgment for one day. She had a family reunion that day. And so throughout the day, as she's going to work, as she's going out, she's, driving in traffic, she's at this family reunion, and people are saying things, and they're talking about stuff, and they're bringing up stories, and they're cutting her off in traffic, and they're doing all this stuff, and rather than react, she holds her tongue. And what she began to notice was the ways that she had allowed her anger and her self-righteousness and her quick, snappy judgments and her desire to always have the last word. She had let these things overtake her life, and she realized, man, how many times throughout the day do I have this struggle with critical judgment? God said, see, I told you. I just needed you to create some space so that you could see it. So maybe it's something else for you. Maybe it's not just food. There are other ways. Here's a question to think about. Who could you be? Who could you be if your only hunger was for God? The Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, said this. Everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. What have you been mastered by? What are you dependent on? What can you fast from? I'm not saying that any of this stuff is bad. We're not necessarily even talking about, the terrible, sinful stuff here. We're just talking about stuff that we let get control of our lives that shouldn't have. What can you fast from? We've got the Lenten season coming up, and a lot of times people give something up for Lent. So maybe what we need to do as individuals, as a church, is to go home today, over the next couple weeks, and pray, God, what is it? What is it that I need to step away from for a bit? Maybe it's something physical, a food, or a drink, or something. Maybe it's something mental, critical judgments, lust. Maybe it's attachment to devices. Maybe it's attachment to people. What is unhealthy about some of these relationships? What can I fast from, separate myself from for just a bit, so that I can grow closer to you? Because the only thing that I want to be mastered by is the cross of Christ. Pray about it. Do it. And fast. So that you can move closer to your Father in heaven. Father, we thank you for examples and for scriptures and for practices that can bring us closer to you. We know that just going through the motions, just performing the task, will not accomplish that, but it has to be an inner attitude of the heart that says, I want nothing more than you. So I'm going to step back. I'm going to step away. I'm going to separate myself from whatever it is. Father, I pray you would reveal that thing, that practice, that habit to all of us. So that we as a church, we as a people, we as your followers, we as your disciples can grow and be aware of you. Show us our desperate desire and our dependence on you. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray.